Hey everyone, welcome to today's video. Welcome to the Gamey Daddy channel. Here I am again with these my Division 1 and 2 comparisons. But hey, it's fun to actually talk about the franchise because for many of us it's a franchise that we've played for a long time. So today I'm going to be taking a deep look into some of the level design decisions and basically trying to answer just a concern. I read a comment. You guys know I make my videos mainly off of, some of the feedback that I get from the channel. And somebody said, the Division 2 missions are just so boring. I find myself finding it very difficult to play. Well, I can kind of say maybe we can chalk up some of that to the fact that you've played almost the same game for almost half a decade, if not, you know what I mean? And that alone can set some fatigue in itself, if you get what I mean. I think if they had even continued the Division 1 and not made a Division 2, I think at some point the burnout would have set in, or the tiredness in some sense for some people. Now, for some other people, they just love the franchise, they keep going, or they'll return back to the Division 1 over, periods of time. Now, I guess this concern about level design is one that is very challenging to deal with because it's kind of comparing apples to oranges in the most simple sense. So first of all, when you look at the map for the Division 1, you're looking at a map that's set in New York City. Now, if you guys know, the Division's New York iteration is actually one of the best in the entire video game world, no doubt. It's a very good one-to-one representation of NYC. If you run around the city, you're going to see places that are very, very representative of those same places in the real world. In fact, this is something that's really cool that many people have actually, attested to. But here's another thing. New York City is actually one of the best places that you can actually set your video games. If you guys notice though, think about games that have been set in some of the, aspects of New York City, or maybe some of the boroughs, right? Think about Batman, Arkham games. Think about Spider-Man. Think about how well these games, yes, they may be iconic, but their worlds are done in a way that can be immersive because it does feel like an urban area. And I think those things play towards what, a Division game will look like. And that's basically in world design. Now, in the case of the Division 2, you have Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is kind of tricky. It's a monumental, somewhat of a prehistoric, I say prehistoric, I would say historic district of the United States of America, and doesn't have, obviously, the same kind of, structure and urban nature of New York City. But this is the best iteration of Washington, D.C. in video game world. Literally the best. I don't know many other games that are set in D.C. with this much detail. I mean, you can literally run, fast travel to the Lincoln Monument, the Lincoln Monument here over at Lincoln Memorial. It's a mission, but you can actually go see the Lincoln Monument in the game. It's crazy, isn't it? To see how they've put a lot of detail in this rendition of Washington, D.C. in a pandemic, weird rebuilding world that they've written and done here. And so when it comes to world design and when it comes to the iteration, I think one of the things that we judge the Division 2 for is that it doesn't have the same atmosphere as the Division 1. And I think that is largely dependent on location. There's nothing you can do. If you go put snow in Washington, D.C., that's going to be a challenging way to go. I mean, think about it. How are we going to pull that off in a coherent way to bring Washington, D.C. to look like this? This atmosphere is a big selling point for the Division 1, most definitely so. And many people have said they should just continue the story from the Division 1. Well, from a narrative perspective, they kind of locked themselves in. They did this thing where in the end of Falcon Lost, for those of you who paid attention, they actually, over here, this incursion, they made the illusion that they have to go find out what happened to the President of the United States. So naturally, the game flowed into New York City from its narrative perspective. And they realized that narrative by actually doing so and bringing the game to DC. So these situations are based on story writing and the expectations. So it's either that they could have just left that entire part of the narrative and just focused on kind of gameplay mechanics and implementation, but that's not what the Division is. The Division had to maintain its own identity to be at least to some level narrative driven. Now, the next part that I think will basically touch on what this, comment said was the level design. Now, level design will also inherit from world design. There's nothing you can do about it, especially when you set your game in a realistic world, when you're trying to render an environment in a world that already does exist to the best of your ability. So over here, I'm at the the Space Administration HQ, where you have a very long mission structure where you play the game and you run into this huge building, underground, classified type area and all that stuff. I can't go in because the mission hasn't started. But if you were to actually judge this based on the way they've done the level design for a rendition of the Space Administration HQ or the Space Administration Agency of a country like the United States, this rendition will win 100% out of 100%. But I think what's happening is we're judging something like Space Administration HQ and juxtaposing it with our beautiful nostalgia and awe of Lexington Event Center. Well, that's not fair. It doesn't really work, does it now? I don't think it does, because the iteration of Lexington Event Center and the iteration that you can actually basically put together doesn't necessarily say, yo, this is one way that we can actually get this done. Because you run into Lexington Event Center, you're basically running into, an event center that they've basically just kind of renamed in a sense. And, they basically tweak the names if you think about it. But some names they basically leave, like Russian Consulate, where I was in just now. That is supposedly a rendition of the Russian Consulate, blah, 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 and all that crazy good stuff. So I don't know what else to say regarding level design. I think anybody that says the level design may be boring, you are most likely correct that it may be boring to you, but here's the deal. The level design is inherited from the world design based on the narrative of the entirety of the game. So how can we judge level design in the Division 2? What are the parameters? What does the level design in the Division game have to have? It has to have choke points. It has to have cover. It has to have enemy spawn points that are logical, that make sense. It has to have areas where you as the player can actually camp, where you can, strategize. It has to have places that allow for good blocking and good viewing when it comes to you trying to encounter your enemy NPCs, right? Well, I don't think that these things are really missing essentially from the mission designs in the Division 2. In fact, some mission level designs are actually just as good as the Division 1. In fact, I'm not going to say that the Division 2 has better level designs because it's kind of obvious that similar level designers actually did the job here. I don't know if you don't see it, I see it a lot. Let me give you one that's really, really obvious. It's here in Roosevelt Island. Where's Roosevelt Island? Let me show you this strategy. Maybe it's a level design. What do they call it? Standard that people use. But here it is. It's here in Lexington and also here in Napalm production site. This particular thing, I don't know how. I think I was born out of frustration from the legendary missions, having to not have a place to actually get cover and take on enemy NPCs. That's when I saw it and I was like, oh my gosh, they're doing the same thing, just iterating it in a different place. So here, when you get to Roosevelt Island, you can take cover outside of here when you're playing legendary, but it's not necessarily the best because enemy NPCs can actually put you in a tight spot. They can come and surround all of this cover and they can use drones to spam you and then disrupt you. So one of your best bets is to actually try to not only, come in here, but to try to agitate them. But all of this area here that's supposedly looking like it's good for cover is actually terrible for cover, isn't it? The same thing happens in Napalm production site as well when you're playing legendary, because yes, you see all of these really cool spots, right? That that looks like it's good for cover, but what it does is not only does it, seem like it's a good cover spot, it locks you into a place where your visibility and your field of view is actually very poor. And I think that's the biggest level design challenge that they put in Napalm and also in Roosevelt that made me go and say, it's either this is a design philosophy for levels or it's designed by basically the people who believe or think the same thing. Because if you're playing legendary with Napalm, I mean, these NPCs are hitting you from all directions. Some of them are changing places. Now, they can't touch you up here because they won't climb. You know, the way they've designed them, they kind of keep them. There's a little, I think there's what they call a navigation mesh in game development, which is basically where the AI should go. So the navigation mesh basically ends down here. It doesn't permit them to climb up top here. Whereas they basically extended that here where they can actually, you know, chase you all the way outside. So all this to say that I don't know if we can judge the level design based on the physical location, because the narrative has driven it over to that place. And so we have to basically judge the level design based on what's been inherited from its present location for each individual game. Note, again, this is not a take on the atmosphere or how both games look. That is a whole different discussion. Yes, the Division 2 has a wonderful atmosphere. Look at that sun, look at the snow, look at all the fog, the things that really do make video games look delicious and beautiful. I get it. But if you had to set a game and your narrative was taking you to DC, a Tom Clancy game, I mean, how would you build DC? Would you build a better DC than the current DC that you had, Washington DC that you have in Division 2? I don't know. Maybe you would. But until then, I think that's kind of the paradigm that we have to use to kind of judge both games. Anyways, that's pretty much my take on this issue. I hope I've been able to basically shed some light on some of these things. I'll talk to you all in another video. These videos are fun, but they're long, man. Peace.